Hey there, yeah, sorry to spring this on you all of a sudden, but we need to talk about Hades. Hi, it's me, your dude buddy friend pal acquaintance guy who randomly shows up to yell at you about video games and sometimes other things, but mostly that first thing. So let me ask you a question. Do you like, love, or lust for any of the following? Greek mythology, roguelikes, beautiful art and sound, indie game developers with an incredible track record of high-quality genre-pushing titles? Then hold on to your coochies because I've got just the thing for that itch. Hades. No, not that one. Yeah. So let me just get right to it. This game fucking rules. It's the latest in the impressively growing catalog of One Supergiant games. For those unaware, these are the guys responsible for Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and now Hades, which, in my humble opinion, is their finest title to date. When it comes to Supergiant games, there's a few things you can be sure to expect in each of their releases. Gorgeously detailed visuals, a soundtrack that is to die for, pun very much intended, tightly designed gameplay, all of which is framed within an engaging story inhabited by equally engaging characters. But Hades really turns it up a notch in all departments and creates something that is so compelling and addictive that over 400 hours later, I still play it on an almost nightly basis. The premise of Hades is simple enough to understand. Set in the world of Greek mythology, the player takes control of Zagreus, son of Hades and prince of the underworld, as he attempts to battle his way out of said underworld in search of his birth mother, who resides somewhere on the surface. This quest takes the form of a roguelike where players slowly amass an arsenal of powers and upgrades granted by various deities of the Greek pantheon, and some other not-so-godlike figures, so that Zagreus can face the challenges that block his path upward. Let's be real for a second here. Hades is not particularly subversive, nor does it really stray from genre conventions. Roguelikes and Greek mythology are nothing new for games. Pretty much everything you'd expect is here. There's random elements, there's customization, there's boss fights, and when you die, you go all the way back to the beginning and have to start over. The thing is, all of these not-so-new elements are contextualized in such an innovative take on Greek mythology that this combination becomes something much greater than the sum of its parts. Rather than attempt to reinvent the wheel, Hades instead opts to make it the most beautiful, high-functioning wheel it can be, and boy howdy does it succeed. So in the interest of telling how it does that, I'm not going to try and reinvent the review. Rather, I'm going to separate this into three parts: gameplay, narrative, and presentation. I said this earlier, but it's really worth repeating. Hades is just so addictively fun, pure and simple. It's definitely one of those games that's easy to learn but hard to master. It allows the player to streamline their experience in a number of different ways and has accessibility options for people who still want to have a good time and experience the story, but don't want to be bogged down by the increasingly punishing challenges the game offers as you put more hours into it. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the best of both worlds for this kind of game. There are certainly times where difficulty is an integral part of the experience and accessibility options of this nature would be inappropriate, but this is not one of those times. You're not a struggling underdog, you're a flourishing overgod who has the support of other gods and who is also royalty. Like all of Supergiant's titles with the exception of Pyre, Hades is viewed from a top-down isometric perspective. All of the gameplay takes place from this vantage point, giving a full view of the surroundings, which is hugely important considering how many enemies can be on screen at any given time. At the start of each run, players choose 3 different items to equip: a weapon, a keepsake, and a summon. The weapons are called the Infernal Arms, with a total of 6 to choose from: the Stygian Blade, Varatha the Eternal Spear, Aegis the Shield of Chaos, Coronacht the Heart-Seeking Bow, the Twin Fists of Malphon, and Exegryph the Adamant Rail. Each of these Infernal Arms has 3 alternate forms with different abilities that can be unlocked as you progress, effectively giving you 24 weapons to choose from. Here are my personal favorites for anyone that's curious. Keepsakes are like charms that give passive benefits. Among the 3 options here, they're the only ones that can be swapped during a run, and only once per level, so you can only use 4 keepsakes total over the course of a run. Summons are used via legendary keepsakes called companions, and they do exactly what you'd think. They let you summon an ally to help you out in a pinch, and are quite limited in the amount of times you can use them. Once equipped, the run begins. The core combat system of Hades is actually quite simple. The player at any given time has 6 different moves available to them: dash, attack, special, cast, call, and summon. This is the moveset regardless of what weapon you have equipped. The moves themselves just manifest in different ways based on the weapon. The goal of each run is to make it to the surface starting from the bottom and going up. To do this, players need to traverse 4 different levels: Tartarus, Asphodel, Elysium, and the Temple of Styx in that order. Each level is segmented into a set amount of chambers with a reward for clearing each chamber of enemies. These rewards are random and visible before entering the chamber, meaning players often have to make a choice about which chambers to enter based on what suits their needs. The rewards themselves amount to boons, upgrades, or currency. Boons are abilities granted by a god of the Greek pantheon and are by far the most diverse and interesting in the effects they can grant. Upgrades are increases to maximum health, the strength of a boon, or the power of your weapon. Currency is currency. Some of it can be used during the run and is lost when you die, while some of it can only be used outside the run to buy cosmetic changes to the House of Hades or permanent upgrades to Zagreus himself. Each level ends with a boss, which upon defeat yields a bounty. Bounties take the form of Titan's Blood, Ambrosia, or a diamond. These are basically the rarest rewards the game has to offer and are used to unlock everything from additional story content to permanent weapon upgrades. Once the boss is taken out, the players enter a neutral zone where they can heal, swap keepsakes, or use the shop before they move on to the next level. That is the fundamental gameplay loop of Hades condensed down to a couple paragraphs. What's so impressive to me about this combat system is that it genuinely never ever got boring, and for a game that's 99% combat, that is the absolute best case scenario. It's just simple enough so that anyone can grasp it right away, and just complex enough that those who explore its potential are rewarded. It always felt like there were new challenges to overcome, new combinations to discover, and new boundaries that could be pushed if I only wanted to, all of which culminates into a combat system that, once you get the hang of, looks something like this.
Fought well. Now that was quick.
Hades has the most engaging narrative that I've ever experienced in a roguelike, and that's probably due to the fact that it actually has a narrative. The genre isn't exactly known for its complex storytelling, and really Hades is no different in that regard, but the actual amount of story on offer here is much higher than what you're going to find in pretty much any other roguelike. To briefly summarize once more, Zagreus, the son of Hades and prince of the underworld, discovers that Nyx, the goddess of the night, who Zagreus spent his whole life believing to be his birth mother, is in fact not that. This leads him to taking on the almost Sisyphean task of breaking out of the underworld in an attempt to find his true mother on the surface. That is honestly all you need to know to understand what's going on here. Hades' plot is entirely character-focused. Most of the enjoyment from the story comes from speaking to Zagreus' allies and enemies to hear their individual perspective on what's going on at that time. With thousands of lines of dialogue from over 20 unique characters, all of which are voiced, there's tons of great conversations to be heard between Zagreus and the rest of the cast.
What do I look like, pal? Some kind of conversationalist?
Zagreus makes for a perfect protagonist for this kind of storytelling because he's an extremely extroverted presence who pushes each individual plot thread further through his own actions. His inability to butt out of the affairs of others is mostly played off as a positive trait, and you always get the impression that, despite overreaching at times, his intentions are good. The events of each character arc and the main story itself are presented to the player in a piecemeal fashion. Pretty much every time you go through a run, whether you complete it or not, there's going to be new dialogue awaiting you in the House of Hades. Certain content is gated behind in-game requirements, but pretty much anyone who plays the game on a semi-consistent basis will have no issue meeting those requirements. This is a simple yet effective way that Hades weaves its narrative and gameplay. For most of the early game, Nectar, one of the collectible currencies, is used pretty much exclusively for advancing the relationships between Zagreus and the other characters. And when I say that, I mean there's a literal relationship meter that eventually maxes out, which is great for completionists. This is contextualized in the story as Zagreus basically just giving everyone contraband under the table so they'll talk to him, which is quite amusing. Speaking of relationships, Hades knocks it out of the park in regards to its representation of LGBTQA+ material. I won't spoil the specifics, but suffice to say that Supergiant Games clearly takes the topic of representation seriously, and I commend them for it. Perhaps Hades' greatest narrative achievement is the ease in which it presents a very unoriginal setting with almost no original characters in a totally new and refreshing way. This is now my favorite take on Greek mythology in anything I've seen or played. There's not a single inclusion from either the Greek pantheon or the mythical figures of legend whose presence I don't thoroughly enjoy. I especially love the choice to set the story of Hades many years after these figures of legend have already died. Seeing how characters like Achilles, Sisyphus, and Orpheus now view their lives and the deeds they became famous for after having eons to reflect is extremely interesting. The gods themselves are incredible too, and feel totally authentic to the source material, with some creative liberties being taken that I think really paid off.
Lord's sake, I don't entirely recall what happened at that feast you threw for all of us down there, but let me tell you, I am under the impression it went smashingly. It was amazing, man. Let's have another one sometime, all right?
The narrative again finds new ways to present the world of Greek mythology by having Zagreus build his relationships with his extended family from the ground up. The gods can't actually converse with Zagreus in real time, so they send him pre-recorded messages in the boons they offer. Seeing all of the gods try to connect with the nephew/cousin/grandson they never knew they had is very entertaining. Conversely, it's just as entertaining to see them throw all that talk of having your back out the window on a moment's notice over the mildest of disrespect. I love these rooms, if only because they're a great way to convey through gameplay just how absolutely petty the Greek gods can be.
Offend me, and I'll drain the last traces of color from those cheeks of yours.
I'm sorry, Demeter.
The main theme of Hades is of course family. The relationship between Zagreus and Hades is certainly the one given the brightest spotlight over the course of the game. Watching Zagreus both subtly and overtly undermine his father's authority at basically any given moment is surprisingly enjoyable.
You are so well accustomed to defying me that you forget there are no others, either living or dead, who would so dare.
There was a lot of potential here for Zagreus to come off as a spoiled, angsty prince with quote-unquote daddy issues. Thankfully, that's absolutely not the case here. Zagreus is anything but spoiled and angsty, though he does definitely have quote-unquote daddy issues. But really, it's hard to blame him. Hades is portrayed as the far more obstinate of the two, and as an audience, we're certainly meant to relate to Zagreus more so than his father. But Hades, both the character and the game, strive to be more complex. He develops and changes just like everyone else in the story, and after hours upon hours of patricide and filicide, both father and son slowly begin to see each other in a new light, building a newfound respect where before there was only animosity. It's an extremely satisfying arc for the both of them, and is once again taking a common theme in Greek mythology and presenting it in a new way. I only have good things to say about the narrative presented in Hades, and I think it stands on equal footing with its extremely well realized gameplay. Among the many laudable qualities of Supergiant Games as a studio, I think it's fair to say that most people's initial gut reactions to anything they produce is, wow, this looks stunning and sounds amazing. I don't have any data on this, but I feel very confident in assuming that Supergiant's art and sound direction are the initial big factors that draw new players to their games and maintain the interest of their long-term core audience. This isn't an insignificant achievement in the slightest. I think it's tempting for a lot of people to view art and sound as a necessary but ancillary facet of game design that's second to gameplay. Of course, gameplay is king when it comes to video games, but let's put this into context for a second. It is currently 2020. I, as a prospective consumer of video games, can log on to any of half a dozen online retailers right now and be presented with literally thousands of games to choose from. How exactly do I go about doing that in lieu of actually being able to play the game? How do I find new and interesting titles that appeal to my specific interests in an ocean of choices? This is one of the biggest struggles facing modern game developers. How do you stand out from a crowd in a world where gaming has become so ubiquitous? Too much choice can be a bad thing and often results in people just not making a choice at all and going back to what they know. Well, one perfectly legitimate answer to that is exceptional presentation. How something looks and sounds is extremely important because it's someone's very first impression of that thing. And until we get to the point where technology allows us to taste our games, those are the two human senses we need to appeal to right at the get-go. The point I'm getting at is that Supergiant's creative team once again proves they're among the best in the business. The work that Gen Z, Darren Korb, and the rest of the team have created here in Hades is nothing short of exceptional. I can't overstate how much I love looking at and listening to this game. The character designs are phenomenally detailed with a great use of color in each one. For example, each of the Olympian gods has a specific dominant color that permeates through their design. In contrast, the chthonic gods have far more overlap in their color palettes, though not without their own interesting details. For example, Thanatos and Charon have very similar color palettes to Nyx. Coincidentally, all of these characters also share a stern and serious demeanor, whereas Hypnos has a much brighter color palette, cluing us in that he's a bit different from the rest of his family. Zagreus and Hades have almost identical color palettes and are the only ones among the chthonic gods to use this specific shade of red. And also, is it just me, or is the color scheme of the Fury sisters perhaps alluding to another set of sisters? I suppose the fates have decreed this forbidden knowledge. Moving on. The environments look phenomenal and dynamically change during battle. Each chamber is individually designed so that they're all recognizable as their own distinct spaces. Not once did the chambers ever bleed together visually for me in a way that made me confused about whether I'd already been there. The effects during combat are vibrant and flashy as they absolutely should be, but never to the point of being distracting, while the 3D models are perfectly condensed representations of the key art. You know, I'm not sure if you've picked up on this yet, but I think this game looks fucking nice! Though, the same can't be said for how it sounds. I've got to be honest with you, dear viewer, it's not often you feel disappointment on this level. Never have I experienced a soundtrack so crudely put together, so lacking in any semblance of melody or rhythm, so full to the brim of MIDI bleeps and bloops of the worst variety, so terribly mixed, with no consideration for... Oh, wait, hold on a minute. Oh, whoops, that's my mistake. I was reading from my Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood script. That's my goof, sorry about that. Let's get back on track. Okay, okay, here we go. Okay, so take everything I just said about that other game and the opposite applies to Hades. The sound design, voice acting, and music in Hades are all fantastic. I mean, did you really need me to tell you that? Since the release of Bastion, Darren Korb's music has been an essential component to all of Supergiant's output, and is probably the single most notable quality of their games to the wider world that doesn't really engage with the medium. Music and its ability to bring people together or convey emotion is one of the primary themes across all of Supergiant's games. It's worth noting that each one of their games features a musician whose music we hear as part of the soundtrack to the game. I just absolutely love touches like that. This time around, our esteemed musicians are Orpheus and Eurydice. Supergiant's talent for seamlessly weaving all of the elements of game design into a cohesive whole is on full display here. In the context of the story, Orpheus is a famous singer of Greek legend who has long since passed away. So what do you do when a famous singer reaches the underworld? Put him to work as your court musician, of course. If you're not familiar with the story of Orpheus and Eurydice in the actual Greek mythology, then I suggest you look it up and then listen to Lament of Orpheus, which is track 5 in the game's OST. Now, I don't want to belabor this point too hard, but something I find so compelling about Supergiant games is the degree to which they go the extra mile in their presentation. Lament of Orpheus is a song written and performed by Darren Korb, but in the game, it's presented to us as a song written and performed by Orpheus himself. It's a really great piece of music on its own that's elevated by its thematic significance to Orpheus's character. It's telling us his story in his own words in the way that makes the most sense for him. This single piece of music does so many things just by itself, and that's because its construction and its placement within the game are extremely well considered. This is the kind of attention to detail that really shows a mastery of your craft. Ashley Barrett lends her voice to Supergiant once again, this time as the singing voice of Eurydice. Needless to say, she kills it. The duet between herself and Darren Korb on Good Riddance is beautiful and melancholic, and I love it. The other sung songs are just as enjoyable and thematically appealing, but I'll leave those for you to discover. The rest of the soundtrack is, what's the word I'm looking for? Great! Hades stands out from Darren Korb's other OSTs with its heavy emphasis on distorted guitars and fast rhythms. Many of the tracks feature super catchy hooks that start out on an acoustic guitar but halfway through transition to an electric. When this transition occurs during gameplay, it's this awesome hype moment where the more intense music just makes everything seem that much more epic. Two good examples of this would be track 9, The Painful Way, and track 14, Scourge of the Furies. Hades' stellar music is complemented by its stellar voice cast. I can't think of a single character whose tone or delivery bothered me. Logan Cunningham makes a triumphant return with more voices to his name than ever, and he nails every single one of them. I literally can't look at a picture of this Hades anymore without hearing "boy" in my head. Sorry, Kratos.
Boy!
The rest of the cast are no slouches either. I particularly enjoyed Jamie Landrum as Nyx, Darren Korb as Zagreus, Avalon Penrose as Megara, and Cyrus Namadi as the ever-so-lovable Theseus.
You are beneath the notice of the gods, monster, whilst I have earned their favor.
Hades is the complete package. It has style, it has substance, it has complementary adjective, and most of all, it has staying power. This is a game that I think people will be revisiting time and time again for its own sake because it's a joy to play and whenever a major patch drops. It's been updated as recently as 2 days ago at the time of writing this with several balance changes, bug fixes, and other quality of life improvements. Hades is an ongoing project that, much like the ever-shifting chambers of Tartarus, has no clear end in sight. And I want to stress that's not a bad thing. I have no doubt that when the time comes, Supergiant Games will put Hades to rest and start their next exciting project. Until that time comes, I'm more than content to die over and over and over again.